You're listening to the 40 Fit Radio podcast, dedicated to the 40-plus community. Join us as we discuss the truth about fitness and health using science, reason, and the experiences of our host and content experts. Welcome to the 40 Fit Nation. Hey, welcome back to the 40 Fit Podcast and the 40 Fit Nation. This is Coach D, and I'm here with Trent this morning.
Good morning.
And today we're going to talk about training outside your element. And this is going to be one of our short series podcasts, probably 15, 20-minute podcasts coming at you. And basically just talking about training or doing your workout program outside your normal element. What got Trent and I thinking about this particular podcast is recently I got to the gym, and I had previously stored all my gear for a trip up to Boston, and so my training bag was at home. And I got to the gym, and I had been traveling, so I'd missed 2 or 3 workouts, and I needed to get my barbell training done. And came up to the gym that evening after treating patients and realized that I didn't have my belt, I didn't have my lifting shoes, I didn't have my knee sleeves, and I needed those things. And I realized how habitual I've become and reliant I am on that equipment. I mean, I know, Trent, you probably feel the same way about some of your equipment. So,
I do. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So we're going to talk about 3 or 4 different elements to training outside your element that make a lot of sense, and just some things that we want to get you thinking, put your thinking cap on about how you are thinking about your training and whether or not some of these things are becoming maladaptive in the way that we apply them to us. So the first thing would be environment. When you get in a groove in training, whether you're an endurance athlete or you are a strength athlete or you're doing something, a combination thereof, you get used to training in your environment. It might be your gym. It might be a local swimming pool if you're a triathlete. It might be a particular running course that you like to do. But no matter what, you definitely get used to training in your environment. And I find for myself that once I get comfortable with something like that, it's difficult for me to go somewhere else and train and not feel a little out of sorts. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. I trained out of my garage for about a year, and when I moved, it was a stark contrast having to go to, I went to a commercial gym for a couple weeks until, we were set up here with the gym in Keller, and I was able to train here. And man, that's tough.
Yeah.
Especially when you're going from having your own spot, you got your own rack, the same plates, the same bar, and you walk into a commercial gym, you don't know what rack's going to be available, if they even have a rack.
Yeah.
I checked beforehand, of course. But the bars are different every time. The plates are different every time.
Sure.
The amount of time that you have to get your sets done while people are working in and out is it's different every time. So,
yeah, it's definitely a different environment. I find, even with my daily schedule, so my general schedule works like this. I go and I treat patients, usually on 3 days a week. I treat full time, and then on 2 days I mostly do admin work. And so on those 3 days, I could theoretically get my training done at my lunch hour. I have an hour and a half long lunch for admin stuff and then to eat. But I could train on my lunch hour. And I have racks and barbells and plates and cardio equipment in all my clinics.
Right. Yeah.
I could do it there. But I'll tell you, it's just, I'm so used to training in our gym now. I'm so used to training in one particular rack, to be honest with you. I like to squat in the middle rack, and I like to lift off the middle rack, which would be hard.
Yep,
well,
hard.
Our rack is called, from left to right, looking at the racks, we have simple, hard, effective. So I'll say I'm training on the hard rack today.
I tend to squat on simple.
Yeah, so there you go.
I'm a simple guy.
Yeah. And so, but you really get used to that. And I find that I think routine's good. We talked about this. There's a lot of things about a workout routine that are good. It's predictable. It's the timing of it's correct. Pretty closely how long it's going to take you to get your training in based on that environment. It is, it's something that you can make part of your daily routine. It becomes a habit per se, just like brushing your teeth or shaving or whatever else you do throughout your daily hygiene, let's call it.
Right.
Then it just kind of becomes part of your day. And so I think routine is good.
Absolutely.
But
Absolutely.
when it becomes maladaptive is when you you mentally think you can't perform at the same level, or you physically can't perform at the same level in an alternative environment.
Right.
In an
right.
alternative, marketplace of whether it be another gym, or when you're traveling, or a friend's gym, or something like that.
Yeah, I'll give you an example that I've had recently. So I still have a rack set up at home. Mainly my wife trains on it, but it's in a spare bedroom in the house we rent. It's 10 foot by 10 foot.
Right.
So you think about it, it's just a platform, 8 foot by 8 foot platform with a rogue rack. You can just fit a barbell and do everything you need on there and nothing more. But it's still a good place to train.
Yeah.
So anyway, last week I trained for the first time in several weeks at the home gym. And I had so much trouble staying balanced while I was squatting. And it made me realize...
Probably your visual perception,
exactly,
your visual field.
My visual field had been compressed.
Space size.
Because it was in a small space, and I'm used to training in the gym where I have several feet. I've got 10 feet of space to look at in front of me when I squat. And so I realized that actually was a great example of... revisiting what we call the master cue in squatting for me.
Yeah.
I realized I was relying very heavily on my eye gaze and the direction of my eye gaze in order to control my balance in the squat.
Sure.
As opposed to feeling the pressure
which
in my
isn't
midfoot.
a bad thing.
Not a bad thing.
Over-reliance on that is a bad thing.
Exactly. So it took me a couple sets, but I re-cued. I said, okay, let me feel that pressure in my midfoot. And I'll still keep my eye gaze about where it would be in the gym, in the big gym. But this way I was able to kind of dial it back, change, adapt to that environment, say, okay, what can I do to make this work in this gym? And that was the thing. But it took me a while, and I think that's part of what you're getting at with environment is when especially if you're a competitor, you need to be able to perform in a variety of environments. There's always going to be challenges. There's going to be stress. You get butterflies in your stomach. But even if it's just everyday life, we train to be prepared for everyday life, and you get thrown curveballs.
I mean, if you're used to training with music, for example, you might go to a competition where they're not going to play music. If you're used to training with a particular bar, if you're used to training with a particular piece of equipment or machine, whatever, and that leads us to equipment, because that's really what spurred this podcast. And so what happened was the other day when I came into the gym, I didn't have all my gear. And ever since my back surgery several years ago, I have gradually just titrated over the last 2 or 3 years to being able to squat without a belt at heavier and heavier loads, based on how I felt how comfortable I felt, for lack of better terms. And it really was a feel thing. I hate to admit that I was getting my feels on, but it was really true. It's really how I kind of progressed it. And so originally when I started, I would squat, way a long time ago, I was squatting the bar right after my back fusion, and then it would be, a little bit more weight and a little bit more weight. And then I would add in belts, let's say at 135, which is nothing for most guys squatting.
Right.
But I felt like I needed it. And then it got to where I wouldn't add a belt until the 155 of my warm-up sets before my working sets. And then it got to 175. And then it got to 205. And then it got to 225. And then it got to 255. And then as of most recent, normally my habit was at 275 in my warm-up sets, I would go ahead and slide my knee sleeves up, go ahead and put my belt on, and I would use those two pieces of equipment. I'd have my lifters on, my lifting shoes on throughout the entire warm up to working set transition. And then at 275, I would go ahead and put the remainder of my gear on and rock and roll. And I think mentally, I probably, looking back, obviously that was more of a mental support than it was anything else. So the other day I got here and I had none of that equipment. And so I was like, oh, great. Okay, great. And I was supposed to squat light. I think I was supposed to squat like 305 or something. Yeah, 305 was, it was a light day, 3 sets of 5, 305. And it was my first day back from traveling to Boston. And I was also feeling a little yucky that day. Come to find out, the next day I got the flu on Tuesday. It hit me like a storm, 50-mile-an-hour wind snowstorm. Oh my gosh, man.
It said
just
sit
crushed
down.
me for a week and a half. Last night was my first night back actually training. I squatted 315 and pressed and deadlift, and it felt good, but definitely winded. Upper respiratory wise, definitely winded. And we create another podcast out of this of, what do you do coming back from illness? Coming back from training from illness, because you're going to feel some funky things. But So I got ready to lift, and I just said, okay, I'm not squatting with the belt. I'm not squatting with my knee sleeves today, and I'm not squatting with my lifter. So let's just squat our normal weight. So I just focused a little bit more, focused especially on my squats. I had found that, and this is a good point, that as I was squatting and as the weight would get heavier, instead of valve-salving and pulling my abdominal wall in and then bearing down, I was basically just using my belt to force my abdominal wall out towards it with more of a relaxed abdominal wall, to be honest with you.
Right.
And kind of overfiring my spinal erectors, my back extensors. And so I was actually kind of relaxing the anterior portion of my trunk. And, when you don't have a belt, you can't squat that way. It just doesn't feel comfortable, doesn't feel stable. And so what I found was it gave me a greater sense of awareness to, okay, this is something I'm doing that's maladaptive. This is not good that I'm using the belt in this manner. It's good that I use the belt, but number one, what I found was I did 3 sets of 5 with 305. It felt great. My back was solid as a rock. Video review looked good. My knees felt a little tweaky because I really like those SBD thick knee sleeves
warmth,
out of the bottom.
If nothing else.
Oh, man. And you get a little bounce out of the bottom.
You definitely do with the SBDs. They're nice and thick. But the warmth is great.
Yeah. I love those things. I'll have to admit, it's a piece of equipment I would never squat heavy without. Unless I had to, and we're made to do it. And so, but basically, what I found was that was a great way to correct some form issues. It was a great way to not rely on the equipment and to also expand my mental capacity with the idea that, wow, I can squat heavy with a stable back and with good quality form, and I didn't cave on it. That everything went fine. And so I think it helps to also build to break some potential false beliefs that we develop as we're lifting. And, well, I need this to lift, or I need that to lift, or, I need this special equipment, I've started lifting with a mouth guard, with a mouthpiece, Do I need the mouthpiece? No, I don't need it. Does it help in performance a little bit? It might be, placebo. I don't know.
Yeah.
But it appears to help you grind a little bit more.
Yeah, it can bear down on the bar a little bit more.
Yeah, it appears to help to develop a little bit more energy towards the bar. And so, but I can do without it. I definitely know I can. And in some cases, I'd probably recommend that we should do without our equipment.
Right.
That we should vary the bar that we're lifting with, or the rack that we're lifting on, or go to a friend's gym just for the sake of going to a friend's gym and lifting around other people. If you don't normally lift around other people, that helps too.
Absolutely.
So,
absolutely. Yeah. I find with the equipment thing, I agree. Sometimes I like to play games with myself on my light days. Recently I've been doing a heavy, light, medium progression with my strength training. So, one day of the week I'll squat heavy. The next day of the week I'll squat 80% of that, and then so on. On my light days, I like to squat without the knee sleeves. You might have convinced me to go without the belt.
Yeah.
Just every once in a while. Just because, and part of it is it's kind of a punishment. It's like, okay, you're not squatting heavy today. You don't really need
bad
these.
Bad lifter.
You only get these when it's heavy
Go
day.
in the corner. Badass lifter. Yeah. Well, it's funny. I think what and here's an interesting thing too. One of my my business partners, Dr. Tina, she's a DPT, doctor of physical therapy, and she trains in our gym here too. And she was having some problems using a belt while squatting mostly, and having some female problems because of it.
Right.
She stopped belting, and we're going to do a podcast about this as she continues on her journey in squatting without a belt and deadlifting without a belt. But what she found was she was actually forcing her abdominal wall and her, lack of better terms, her viscera, her organs, forcing them more downward than she was pulling in and supporting it with her pelvic floor and her lower abdominal wall. Yeah. And what it was doing is it was causing some problems. And once she stopped belting, the problem went away.
Right.
So it's an interesting aside that the belt is a tool. It's a good tool. But by changing that equipment or modifying that equipment or going without that equipment some, then it really does help us to dial in form potentially, look at maladaptive behaviors, look at false beliefs that we've developed in our lifting program, and recognizing that I could lift without a belt very well with great performance and potentially, in some cases where appropriate, better form. If I've developed some bad habits.
Yeah, and certainly, we've seen some very, very high level lifters. I think Constantine, the great deadlifter, may he rest in peace.
Yeah.
He's deadlifted well over 900 pounds without a belt.
Yeah.
So it definitely can be done. Now, squat shoes. I think that's an interesting one. I don't know that I would voluntarily squat without my shoes, and only for the reason that that they've got the heel, it inclines your shank forward.
Yeah,
I
felt like I was in my knees a little bit.
It changes your balance quite a bit. I've noticed
Yeah.
even on things like the press. I've had a couple of times where I wasn't able to get my pressing movements in the gym, so I'd finish at home, and sometimes I'd leave my shoes up at the gym. So coming home, I've got my flats on. And it throws me forward into my toes every time.
Well, think about it. There's direct correlation between shank angle, your tibia, and its advancement, how far it's advanced forward anteriorly, and the amount of heel that you have. So that's just a given. And I'm not real sure that the metatarsal strap, okay. I mean, if you really look at it, you put enough weight on the bar, the metatarsal strap is not doing a whole lot. I mean, it really matters how rigid the shoe is.
Right.
But a good flat sole, yes, important, versus like a running shoe that doesn't have any lateral stability and you just roll off the edges of.
Mm-hmm.
So, but the heel does make a difference because it actually changes the mechanics, the physical angle of the tibia during the bottom of the squat. It also kind of changes your balance point because you're standing on something that's not as angled forward as it was prior to. So you definitely have to alter things. But, I will say I felt like I was in my knees a little bit more and my knees were a little sore, but that could be mentally too. I don't know. But I think it makes a difference. So I think that the goal there is to basically begin to think a little bit deeper about some of the habits that you have with your equipment, with your environment, and make sure that you're not developing a false beliefs that, I've got to have this or I've got to have that. I mean, I've had some lifters or some athletes in some of our gyms over the years that, everything has to be just right. The music has to be just right. I got to be on this bar. I got to be on this. And when you're competing, I could see that maybe because you develop a neural engram. You develop this pattern of activities that cues your central nervous system to be able to rock. Pitchers
You hear this song and it's time to go.
Exactly.
This PR time.
Exactly. And so I get that. But in day-to-day training, I think it's we need to be able to learn to adapt. And then that leads us to the last point, and that is this, basically, that routine is good.
Right.
We want routine, especially when we're talking about strength training. What we're not advocating as coaches is for our listening audience to go out there and just change your routine and your program just because it's working too well,
right?
Or something like that. We don't. All of a sudden you go from
muscle confusion.
Yeah. All of a sudden you go from strength training to from classical barbell strength training to muscle hypertrophy training or something, or that to endurance training. Unless you have a specific reason, always drive your habits based on the desired outcome.
Right.
What are you trying to create here? But I think you can say that we can examine and evaluate our model versus habit. What's actual dogma and habit, and what's actual real substance, And it kind of the best analogy I can talk about that is like in religion, maybe. You've got actual doctrine in religion, and then you've got just dogma that's man-made dogma. They're definitely two separate things. If you believe in religion a certain way, and there's a difference there. So same thing.
One
here.
has more of the dogma, you'd say, has more of a cultural element to it. So it's
man-made,
intertwined with it's man's own interpretations.
And doctrine can be based on more historical facts and on more data and written scripts and those types of things. And it's a little bit, there's just more substance to it.
Right.
I mean, a good example would be you have Christianity, and then you have Baptist, Episcopalian, Methodist. You have all these different offshoots of the denominational beliefs that are really more man-made than the basis of Christianity itself, which is more doctrine. And then you've got all these different denominational beliefs. I don't know if that's a good example or not, but that's what I think of.
I think it's valid. We've talked about when we were discussing strength training in our earlier episodes that everything flows from a model,
Yeah,
right? And
yeah,
so
yeah.
the model is the model. We really don't change the model unless there's very, very good
If it's,
evidence.
don't fix what's not broke.
Yeah, and it's
you know?
and there's many thousands of lifters have told us that
Yeah.
the model's right. Now, you can adapt the model to the person, or to adapt the person to the model, rather, right? And that's, I think, what we're talking about here is that the basic idea of how you perform the movements, how you progress in your training, that doesn't change, but how you approach it can change. You know,
Yes,
whether you're
absolutely.
Using, whether you're using equipment, not using equipment. Yeah. And so that's
No, I
an
think
important
that's a good
distinction.
point.
I think as coaches, we encourage, especially for newer trainees, we encourage habit because we want everything to be repeatable, because
Right.
that takes one variable out of the equation. So now we can focus on the variables that matter, intensity, duration, all those kind of things.
Right. Exercise selection, whatever it is.
Exercise
well,
selection.
and I think, with that, at the end of this, it's routine is important. Consistency is important. Adherence to the program is important, and don't try to fix what's not broke
Right.
is important. And at the same time, self-awareness and self-evaluation as to why you think about the things the way you do is important too.
Yes.
So I also think that's where good coaching comes into play too, that a coach has a more objective viewpoint and can tell you, hey, you know what? I think you can go without this today. Let's do this way instead of this way. Or let's modify this. And there should be a reason why the coach is doing that, and there should be a desired outcome. But I think that, ultimately, at the end of the day, our goal is to translate all this training, all this fitness, all this exercise, all of this health and wellness that we're recommending into real life function. And it is definitely more functional to every now and then mix some things up. Try new environments, try new equipment, expand your horizons a little bit, because it probably relates to real life a little bit better, But we build that off consistency and reliability and habit and programming and models and those types of things.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think one last, closing story. I always remember hearing about Michael Phelps when he went on that incredible run of gold medals a few years ago. And one of the things his coach used to do when they're training in the pool is, he'd mess with his equipment.
Yeah,
before,
it's great,
right
man.
before, I
It's
guess
killer,
they do
but it's great.
the equivalent of scrimmages, for,
Yeah.
right
Like
before
mock
they get ready to race.
mock meets, or demo meets. Yeah,
He'd take his goggles and hide them.
yeah,
And it's like, no, it's time to go. You got to get on the platform right now.
Right.
Go. And kind of putting you in the pressure cooker. It's what we've mentioned it before, but it's an interesting concept of kind of taking yourself right to the edge of what you can tolerate, and backing off a little bit. And that teaches you that, so when you do get put into unusual, unpredictable situations in real life, you can deal with them better. You've got a skill set. That's a skill in and of itself.
Absolutely. And I think, we do that in the military with tactical training. We do that, scenarios and situational training. And I think also, CrossFit's whole mantra over the years that it's been, in the marketplace has been the known and the unknowable. And the whole idea there is that training with CrossFit correlates to doing things that are known and also things that are unknowable, because it's constantly varied, high intensity, random type training.
Sure.
And I think there is some
I think there's some
value
merit
to that. There's some merit to that. I think there are some issues with the model and building foundational elements and building foundational strength early on. And I think Greg Glassman, if you read Greg Glassman and some of the founder of CrossFit, and then also some of the earlier coaches, you'll find that they agree very much along that line, that thought line that foundational strength should be first, and then endurance, and then stamina, or stamina and endurance, and all these other skills will fall into place. But what's happened is, within the marketplace, is it's kind of gotten a little diluted, as many messages do, as the population expands and as the user base increases. So, but man, great talk about training outside your element. I think it's important to challenge ourselves sometimes. Thanks, guys, for joining the 40 Fit Radio podcast and the 40 Fit Nation. You can find us on Instagram at 40 Fit Radio. You can find us also on Facebook at the Facebook community group. which we're kind of trying. Trent and I are kind of trying to decide what we're going to do with that in 2019 and how we're going to retool that and how effective it is. But look for some changes there and some new updates in 2019. Some potential seminar series coming up in the 2019 year. We're going to be doing some planning here in the next several weeks about what's going to be coming for our listener audience. You can also find Trent on Instagram at Marmalade Cream, and you can find me at DL Deaton. And you can also drop us a line at 40fit.com and go to the 40 Fit Radio podcast and listen to the episodes there, or listening to them on your media app, which would be SoundTunes or iTunes.
SoundTunes?
Whatever.
Never heard of that one.
I don't know. I'm old, okay?
Well, you got to get with it, man.
Whatever those. All I know is go to 40fit.com. You can listen to it there. But do some review for us. Let us know if you're enjoying the podcast. And then also drop us a line somewhere via email or one of these other social media outlets and let us know what you'd like to hear talked about. So that's what we're here for. Thanks for joining the 40 Fit Nation.
Thanks.